The closet door was locked from the outside with a barrel bolt, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $3.49. I could hear her before I saw her, a small, wet hitching sound, the kind a 6-year-old makes when she's been crying so long her body has forgotten how to stop. I turned the bolt, opened the door, and found my granddaughter sitting cross-legged on the carpet in the dark, holding a mason jar of glass buttons against her chest, like it was the only thing in the world that still loved her. Her cheeks were raw, her eyes were swollen nearly shut, and behind me, Diane Prescott set down her wine glass, adjusted her reading glasses, and said, she was being dramatic during book club. Children need structure, Margaret. She said my name the way you say the name of someone you've already decided doesn't matter. She had no idea who was standing in her hallway. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to Karma's Keeper. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I read every single one. My name is Margaret Callahan. I'm 62 years old. For 28 years I was a Child Protective Services investigator for the state of Ohio, assigned to Franklin County Children's Services, out of the Columbus office on East Main Street. In nearly 3 decades, I investigated over 1,400 cases of suspected child abuse and neglect. I testified in 147 dependency hearings. I wrote forensic case summaries that were cited in 11 appellate decisions. I trained incoming investigators for 9 years. I retired 4 years ago, 6 months after my husband Paul died of pancreatic cancer, and I moved into a 2-bedroom ranch on Birchwood Lane in Westerville, with a garden out back and a cat named Noodle who sleeps on Paul's side of the bed. But to Diane Prescott, I was just Tommy's quiet mother. The one who brought banana bread to holidays, and didn't argue when Diane rearranged the seating chart, so I was at the far end of the table, next to the coat room. Last Thanksgiving, Diane explained to me, slowly, as if I might not follow, what a timeout was. I've written 340-page case files on what happens when timeouts involve locked doors, but I smiled, nodded, and passed the cranberry sauce. That was the woman she thought I was. My son Thomas married Jenna Prescott in 2018. Jenna is a sweet woman, quiet the way women become quiet when they've been managed their entire lives. She loves Lily. I've never doubted that. But Jenna was raised by Diane the way a bonsai is raised, clipped, shaped, turned toward the light Diane chose, and praised only for growing in the direction she was pointed. Thomas works as a senior project manager for a commercial construction firm in Dublin, Ohio. Long hours, 60, sometimes 70 a week. He trusts Jenna, and Jenna trusts her mother, and that chain of trust is how Diane Prescott ended up watching Lily 3 days a week at her home on 2214 Edgewater Drive in Shaker Heights. A 5-bedroom colonial with Carrara marble countertops, a temperature-controlled wine cellar, and apparently a hallway closet where she stored my granddaughter when she became inconvenient. Diane is 67, 5'7", slender in the way women are slender when they eat salads performatively and judge other women's plates. Silver hair cut in a sharp bob. She runs the Shaker Heights Women's Literary Society. She chairs the annual Garden Gala. She is, by every visible metric, a pillar of her community, and she has a voice like polished marble, smooth, cold, and designed to make you feel like the surface beneath you is tilting. Paul used to say, "Mag, that woman talks to you like you're the help." I'd laugh. But he wasn't wrong. My friend Clara Jessup, retired school counselor, 31 years in the Westerville district, told me once over coffee, "Maggie, I've watched you sit through 4 Christmases with that woman looking at you like you're furniture. Why do you let her?" I told Clara the same thing I told every new investigator I trained. You don't react to the first thing you see. You watch. You note. You wait for the pattern. Because a pattern is a case, and a case is leverage. I didn't know then that I was already building one. The afternoon I found Lily in the closet was a Wednesday, March 12, 2025. I was supposed to pick Lily up at 4 o'clock, but my dentist appointment on Henderson Road ended early, so I arrived at 2:47. Diane's silver Lexus ES was in the driveway, alongside 3 other cars. Book club. I let myself in through the side door the way Jenna had told me I could. The house was full of laughter. 5 women in the living room, wine glasses catching the light. A cheese board fanned out on the ottoman. Diane's voice carried over the others. She was mid-anecdote, something about a florist who'd botched the centerpieces at the gala. I walked past the kitchen toward the back hallway, where Lily's shoes usually sat by the guest room. That's when I heard her. A small, broken sound. Not screaming, not calling for help, just the shuddering breath of a child who had given up being heard. I've listened to that sound in apartments, in trailers, in homes that cost more than mine. It sounds exactly the same everywhere. The hallway closet had a barrel bolt installed on the outside. Chrome, new, recently mounted. The screw heads were still bright. I slid it open. The closet was dark. No light. No ventilation beyond the gap under the door. Lily was sitting on the carpet between a vacuum cleaner and a stack of board games, clutching the mason jar of buttons I'd given her last Christmas. Her face was blotched red. She looked up at me and said, "Grandma Maggie?" I was quiet. I was so quiet. In Child Protective Services, we call that an unprompted disclosure. A child telling you, without being asked, the rule they were trying to follow. It means someone set the rule. It means this has happened before. I picked her up. She weighed 43 pounds. I carried her out of the closet and into the hallway, and that's when Diane appeared, wine glass in hand, book club laughter still echoing behind her. "Margaret, what on earth are you doing here early?" "She's fine. She was throwing a fit during our meeting, so I gave her a timeout." "You can't let children run the house." She smoothed her blouse. "Honestly, Jenna lets her get away with murder. A little quiet time never hurt anyone." A little quiet time. In a locked closet. In the dark. For a 6-year-old. I looked at the barrel bolt. I looked at Diane. I said, "How long has she been in there?" Diane waved her hand. 20 minutes. Maybe 30. She's fine." I said nothing else. I carried Lily to my car. I buckled her into the booster seat. I gave her a juice box from my bag. I got into the driver's seat, closed the door, and sat in Diane Prescott's driveway for 4 minutes without moving. That evening, I gave Lily dinner at my house. Grilled cheese, tomato soup, sliced apples. She sat at my kitchen table, and we sorted buttons from the mason jar. Blue ones. Pearl ones. A brass military button Paul had added from his grandfather's coat. Lily sorted them by color into little paper cups, the way we'd done since she was 4. While she sorted, I asked her, gently, open-ended, the way I'd been trained to ask, if Grandma Diane had ever asked her to sit in the closet before. Lily didn't look up. 3 times, she said. When I spilled juice on the rug, when I talked during her phone call, and when I cried because I missed Mommy. She said it the way children say things they've accepted. Not angry, not scared. Just factual. And that tone, that flat, rehearsed calm, is the thing that, in 28 years of fieldwork, never stopped breaking my heart. I called Thomas that night. I told him what I'd found. I told him about the bolt. I told him about Lily's words. He sighed. "Mom, Diane's just old school. It's not a big deal. Jenna says her mom used to do the same thing with her when she was little. It's just how she parents." I said, "Thomas, a barrel bolt on the outside of a closet door is not parenting. It's confinement, and your daughter told me it's happened 3 times. He said, "Can we not do this right now? I just got home. I'll talk to Jenna." He didn't talk to Jenna. I know because I called Jenna 2 days later, and she said, "Mom Callahan, I appreciate your concern, but my mother raised me, and I turned out fine." That sentence, "I turned out fine," is the most common sentence I heard in 28 years of investigating child abuse. It's the sentence people use to close a door they're afraid to open. I sat in my garden that evening, the mason jar of buttons on the table beside me, and I made one phone call. I didn't call Thomas. I didn't call Jenna. I didn't call Diane. I called Dr. Sandra Whitfield, supervising investigator at Franklin County Children's Services, my former colleague, my friend, and the woman who took over my caseload when I retired. Sandra answered on the second ring. I said, "Sandy, I need to make a report. It's my granddaughter." There was a pause. Sandra knew what that sentence cost me. Then she said, Tell me everything. Start from the bolt. I told her everything. Within 48 hours, Sandra had opened an intake case. Case number 2025 FC F03187. She assigned it to an investigator named Priya Deshmukh, a woman I'd trained myself in 2019. Priya was thorough, precise, and, this mattered, she didn't care whose zip code the house was in. I documented everything the way I'd documented 1,400 cases before. Photographs of the hallway closet, the barrel bolt, the absence of a light fixture inside, the carpet where Lily had been sitting. Photographs of the mason jar, which Lily had clutched so tightly the lid had left a red ring on her palm. I wrote a 3-page timeline with dates, statements, and context. I noted the unprompted disclosure word for word. 3 days after my call, Priya Deshmukh knocked on Diane Prescott's door at 2214 Edgewater Drive at 10:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. Diane answered in a silk robe. Priya identified herself, stated the nature of the investigation, and asked to see the hallway closet. Diane's face went white. Not angry white, caught white. There's a difference, and after 28 years, I can read it in under a second. Priya documented the bolt. She measured the closet, 3 feet by 5 feet, no ventilation, no light source. She interviewed 2 of Diane's neighbors. One of them, a retired teacher named Gerald Hoffman who lived at 2216 Edgewater, told Priya he'd heard a child crying on at least 2 occasions over the past 3 months, and assumed it was a tantrum. The other neighbor, Susan Chen at 2210, said she'd seen Diane bring Lily inside once while Lily was sobbing, and Diane was gripping her arm above the elbow. Susan had made a note of it on her phone calendar, January 28, 2025. Parallel to the CPS investigation, I called Ruth Nakamura. Ruth is a family law attorney in Columbus, Nakamura and Stein, on South 3rd Street. I've referred families to Ruth for 15 years. She is 5'2", speaks barely above a whisper, and has never lost a custody modification hearing in Cuyahoga County. Ruth reviewed my documentation. She reviewed Priya's preliminary findings. On March 24th, 12 days after I opened that closet door, Ruth filed a petition for emergency temporary custody modification in Franklin County Domestic Relations Court, requesting that primary custodial oversight during non-parental care hours be transferred from Diane Prescott to me. The petition was 41 pages. It included 23 exhibits. Diane hired Bradley Fulton, a family attorney from Pepper Pike whose hourly rate was $475. Bradley Fulton called Ruth's office and said, and I'm quoting from the message Ruth played for me, "My client is a respected member of the Shaker Heights community, and this is clearly a vindictive grandmother with a grudge. We'll have this thrown out by Friday." Ruth listened to the voicemail, set down her pen, and said, "Good. Let him say that in front of Judge Moreno. I'd love to watch." During the discovery period, something else surfaced. Priya's investigation found that Diane had installed the barrel bolt in November 2024, 4 months before I found Lily. The hardware store receipt was on Diane's credit card statement. She'd purchased 2 barrel bolts, one for the hallway closet and one for a utility closet in the basement. When Priya asked about the second bolt, Diane said it was for storage. There was a child's blanket in the utility closet. It was Lily's. I recognized the stitching. Thomas called me 2 weeks after Ruth filed. His voice was different, quieter. Flattened. He said, "Mom, did you really call CPS on Jenna's mother?" I said, "Thomas, I called because your daughter was locked in a closet in the dark, and when I told you, you said it wasn't a big deal." There was a long silence. Then he said, "She told me it was a timeout." I said, "A timeout has an open door. A timeout has light. A timeout doesn't require hardware from Lowe's." He didn't say anything for 11 seconds. I counted. Then he hung up. The hearing was on April 14, 2025, at 9 a.m. in Courtroom 7B, Franklin County Domestic Relations Court. Judge Angela Moreno presiding. Diane arrived in a cream-colored suit with her attorney Bradley Fulton. She looked composed. She looked like a woman who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Ruth presented the case in the order I would have presented it, because I'd helped her build the exhibit structure the same way I'd built them for 147 dependency hearings. The barrel bolt photographs, the closet measurements. Lily's unprompted disclosure, documented in my handwriting within 2 hours of the event. Priya Deshmukh's investigation report. Gerald Hoffman's and Susan Chen's neighbor statements. The credit card receipt showing 2 bolts purchased in November. The child's blanket found in the basement utility closet. Bradley Fulton objected 4 times. Judge Moreno overruled 3 of them. On the 4th, she looked at Fulton over her glasses and said, "Counselor, if your next objection isn't substantive, I'm going to assume you're stalling, and I don't appreciate having my calendar wasted." Diane took the stand. Under cross-examination, Ruth asked her one question that ended everything. "Mrs. Prescott, can you explain to the court why a closet used for what you describe as a standard childhood timeout required a locking mechanism installed on the outside of the door?" Diane opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her attorney put his hand on the table as if to steady something. The courtroom was silent for 6 seconds. She said, "She would have come out." Ruth said, "Yes, Mrs. Prescott. That's what children do when they're frightened. They try to leave." Judge Moreno granted the emergency modification. Primary custodial oversight during non-parental care hours was transferred to me, effective immediately. Thomas and Jenna were ordered to complete a court-approved parenting assessment program. 16 sessions. Diane Prescott was granted supervised visitation only, with visits to be conducted at a county-designated family visitation center, not in her home. The barrel bolts were ordered removed. A follow-up home study was scheduled for 60 days. Diane left the courtroom without speaking. Bradley Fulton walked her to her Lexus. She sat in the driver's seat for 9 minutes before pulling out of the parking lot. I know because Ruth and I watched from the second-floor window while Ruth drank a coffee, and I held the mason jar of buttons I'd brought as Exhibit 14. Thomas came to my house on April 22nd. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Lily sorts buttons. He put his hands flat on the surface and stared at them for a long time. "Mom," he said, "I didn't know." I said, "You didn't ask." He looked at me then, and his eyes were wet, and his jaw was trembling, and he said, "She's my daughter. She's my daughter, and I didn't protect her." I reached across the table and put my hands over his. I felt something in my chest crack open, just for a moment, just a fracture along a fault line I'd been holding steady for 6 weeks. My eyes burned. I let them burn, then I sealed it back up. "You're here now," I said. "That matters." Thomas and Jenna completed the parenting program. Jenna, to her credit, began seeing a therapist on her own, a woman named Dr. Allison Teague in Upper Arlington. 3 months later, Jenna told me over the phone, her voice shaking, "I think what my mother did to me growing up wasn't normal either." I told her I was proud of her, and I meant it. Diane completed her supervised visitation requirements. She sees Lily once a month at the Franklin County Family Visitation Center on Morse Road. A social worker is present for every visit. Diane brings coloring books and sits across a table from her granddaughter, in a room with fluorescent lighting and a 2-way mirror. She has not been alone with Lily since March 12, 2025. Lily lives with me 3 days a week now. We have a routine: school pickup at 3:15, snack, usually apple slices and peanut butter, homework at the kitchen table, and then we sort buttons. The mason jar sits in the center of my kitchen table, right where Paul's reading glasses used to be. Lily knows every button by name now. The pearl one is the princess. The brass military button is Grandpa Paul's brave button. The tiny blue one with the chip is the survivor. She named that one herself. People will look at a 62-year-old woman in a ranch house in Westerville and see someone who bakes banana bread and gardens and maybe watches too much true crime on Tuesday nights. They'll call her Tommy's mom. They'll seat her at the end of the table. They'll explain basic concepts to her slowly. The way you talk to someone you've already decided isn't keeping up. Let them. Let them underestimate the woman who spent 28 years learning exactly how the system works, exactly what a judge needs to see, and exactly how to write a case file that doesn't leave room for a single objection to land. Patience isn't passive. Patience is a woman sitting in a garden with a jar of buttons, waiting until she has every piece in order before she makes the one call that changes everything. I still sort buttons with Lily every Wednesday. Some nights, after she's in bed, I hold the mason jar up to the kitchen light and turn it slowly. Each button catches the light differently. Paul would have loved that, the way something small and quiet and overlooked can become the most important thing in the room. Lily asked me last week why I keep so many buttons. I told her the truth. Because every single one held something together. If you stayed with me to the end, I'm grateful. Hit like if it meant something. Subscribe to Karma's Keeper. So the next one finds you. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been the quiet woman who made one phone call and changed everything? I'll be reading. Take care of each other out there, especially the little ones who can't speak up for themselves yet.